Welcome to Guerrilla Discipleship. I'm your host, Kevin Baker, and I'm so glad that you joined me today especially. And I'm looking forward to not only today, but the next few weeks, maybe several weeks, because I think it's time, as I was praying about Guerrilla Discipleship and where God wanted us to go, I really think it's time for us to do kind of a relaunch. And here's what I mean by that. Maybe it's a soft relaunch, maybe it doesn't matter. But I realized that not sure that it's been a long time if I've ever really explained where did this idea come from? Why are we even doing this? And so I wanted to just revisit that and then spend a little bit of time talking about why, where we're going. Not only why we're here, but where we're going. So, gosh, maybe 10 years ago now, we were sitting around as a staff struggling with the idea of God's call on our lives to make disciples, and how in the church in the West, we were struggling with that. We were busy with programs. We did a lot of programs, and they were good programs. There's nothing wrong with programs in one sense, but we couldn't trace, are they impacting, are they transforming people's lives? More than that, are they really helping us to be equipped to live out the Great Commission, which is to be a disciple who makes other disciples who can make other disciples, and so on. And our sort of judgment was that the answer was no. They were great programs, but they weren't doing that. They were feeding a consumer mindset. They were giving people what they wanted, what they expected out of church, but not necessarily helping them to grow spiritually. Our training programs and equipping programs were not very effective. Now, the research, and I brought along some stats here just for me more than anything else, but most studies show that fewer than 5% of churches in the West are really focused at all or maintain in any way an active, reproducing, disciple-making culture. Less than 5%. Now, think about that. If less than 5% of the people who lived in America were reproducing, it wouldn't be long before we would have no country at all, right? There would be no population. We would be, I don't know what that would be, 95% negative growth in terms of our population growth. And so what do we do with the fact that the church, only 5%, and that's probably a generous look, is that only 5% of churches have any kind of intentional, ongoing, consistent, and effective reproducible disciple-making process. That means that we are effectively allowing ourselves as followers of Jesus to die out in our own culture. Wow. And here, think about this. Most churches, the vast majority of churches don't even have a measurement tool for this. What do we measure in churches? We count ourselves as successful if we're growing in attendance and if we're growing in giving. But those are really what we measure. We measure how many people are coming, how many people are in our Bible studies, and how many people come to worship. What's the giving look like? Can we sustain our programming? But we don't even measure most churches don't have anything set up to even measure how are we doing at reproducing disciples who reproduce other disciples out in the world. Partially, that's hard to do because those are all mostly growing away from us. It's like my family. I have kids and I have grandkids. Well, your kids get old enough that they move out and they marry. So if I was evaluating how successful Michelle and I had been, and I was measuring it by how many kids lived in our house, I would be seeing a diminishing return. But you and I both know we feel like a kid who's living at their house into their 30s and 40s may be a sign of unhealth, not a sign of health and growth. So just the fact that we have more and more people coming and sitting in our pews doesn't mean we're a healthy ministry, that we're producing the kind of ministry effectiveness that God called us to, that great commission to go into all the world. So we've got a problem. We've trained our churches almost out of being disciple makers. We've trained our church people out of being disciple makers. We've been training them to be good church people. And good church people aren't necessarily always great missionaries. Good church people maintain the church building, maintain the church programs. But if we said church programmings aren't necessarily effective at reproducible disciple making, then maybe we're sustaining something that isn't as effective as we want it to be. All of that was swirling. And I began to just pray about that and say, God, what do you want us to do? And as I was praying, I began to see the church as an institution, and realizing that there's great things about the institution of the church. I have given my life to it in many ways. I'm a servant in it. But we too often as individual Christians see the church as an institution. And so when somebody asks, how's the missions doing? I don't know, you'd have to ask the church, as if there's an institution out there that we're going to go talk to. And so we've displaced responsibility. We've said that basically the responsibility for ministry belongs to the church. That gives everyone who comes and sits in the pew the opportunity to go, I don't know, I hope the church is doing it, or my church seems to be doing it. But that leads us to that 80-20 rule. 20% of the people are doing 80% of the work, that kind of thing. And so we just we have to look hard at this. And I began to agonize over it. And I realized that I had heard before about the difficulties of guerrilla warfare. That an institutional big army often doesn't really have effective means to combat a guerrilla army. A guerrilla army, guerrilla warfare is not a big army against army. It's kind of basically the founding of our nation, right? If you think about America, we were a bunch of farmers and settlers and pilgrims, and Britain, the United Kingdom, was a very organized institute. They had an amazing army. And yet, these Minutemen, these guerrilla warfare revolutionaries, were able to successfully not only hold off, but defeat the institutional army. Now, I don't want to go into all of the tactics, but that began to resonate with me. I began to think, God never called us to have big institutional church movements. He looked at 11 men, 11 faithful disciples, and he said, go into all the world and make disciples who will make disciples, who will make disciples. Paul, when he was speaking to Timothy, said, Timothy, the things you've heard me say in the presence of lots of people and many witnesses, you take and you pass on to other people who can pass it on. There's 4 generations, Paul to Timothy, Timothy to others, and others to others as well. That was always what God designed. Jesus himself didn't come and institute the church. He didn't form the church as an institution. He gathered people together as followers. But he just gathered 12 people and said, I'm going to change the world with you. All of that you've heard before. But that's what guerrilla discipleship was born out of. And I remember I wrote a sort of a white paper, and all of the staff read it, and every one of the staff said the same thing. Like the concept, agree with what you're saying, but guerrilla discipleship feels a little like bloody, and it might be a turnoff to our culture that's tired of violence, and I get it, and I just couldn't get it out of my mind. So we basically stuck with it, and I said, eventually started doing a podcast and wanting to talk about these principles, and we are continuing to do that today. So that is the formation of guerrilla discipleship. In fact, let me just say it this way. The mission of guerrilla discipleship has always been to inspire individual followers of Jesus to see themselves as called by God to make disciples who make disciples, to empower ordinary Christians to know this, that the big institutional church can't do what God called us to do. And God never intended for the big institution of the church to do that. God called individual believers in their relationships with family, friends, co-workers, and out in the world in which they live to be spreading as witnesses of his goodness, spreading the goodness of God around and to build the kingdom. That's guerrilla discipleship. So it's not violent. In fact, our main tool is prayer and love. We want to continue to seek God's face, and we want to love Him and love the world in such a way that we're compelled to share with people what God has done for us. So, but it is a process to get ourselves out of the institution. This doesn't happen. To de-institutionalize ourselves is hard. I remember one of my favorite movies, Shawshank Redemption. And if you've ever seen that movie, one of the characters, Red, who's in prison, been in prison for most of his life, gets released, and he struggles. He struggles to figure out when he can even use the restroom, because when he was in prison for all those years, he had to ask permission to even go to the bathroom. And he says at some point in the movie, he says, I'm an institutional man now. And we've got to face it. We're institutional Christians. And God, I believe, is waking us up from that. He wants to energize us, not again that we would say the institutions are bad, but we need to reinvigorate individual hearts so that the body of Christ lives out faithfully what God's called us to do. And that means taking individual responsibility as a follower to say, it's my job to help others come to know Christ. It's not the church's job, the pastor's job, the missionary's job, the missions team, the evangelism team. It's not a big fancy program. It really is just me being able to have spiritual conversations. That's where we are. That's who we are. That's what Guerrilla Discipleship is aimed to do, to be a tool to maybe disrupt our thinking a bit, reorient our thinking, and then be as helpful as we can to equip folks who feel and hear the call of God on their lives in this way. So that's how we got to be here. Now, where are we going to go? I'm going to spend the next few, and I think it's going to turn into months, and I'm really excited about this, walking through several things in detail that I think will help, I hope will help inspire and equip you, and all of us. And I look forward to this journey together. And where God's going to take us. But here are the things. I think where we're going to go from here, the next few weeks, we're going to talk about the guerrilla mindset. Just these paradigm shifts that God, I think, is inviting us to think through so that we can see ourselves and see the church in the way that Jesus did, instead of through the lens of 2,000 years of tradition. Again, nothing wrong with tradition. But Jesus constantly warned us, don't replace the commands of God with the traditions of men. So let's make sure that we're continuing to think and see the world the way Jesus saw it. And then the second thing I want to do after we go through some weeks talking about the guerrilla mindset, I want to talk about guerrilla tactics. What are the tactics we use as we see God using us, deploying us in the world, in our own families, in our own context, to be used of Him to help others come to know the beautiful love of God? The third thing that I want to do is to talk about guerrilla warfare and how we want to move into defeating the lies that many of us have come to believe. A lot of those lies center around, I don't know what to do, I'm not ready yet, I can't do it, God can't use me, I don't know the Bible enough. There's sort of these lies that have come out of a professionalization of ministry and an institutionalization of the church that leaves a lot of us, just ordinary believers, feeling unqualified, unworthy, and not ready. And I want to attack those lies and see if we can kind of get back to the truth. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to help people, if you want, I hope by this time you're excited about this, we're going to help you move from being just a disciple of Jesus to a disciple maker for Jesus. And with Jesus. That's the most exciting adventure. You think about the life of the disciples. It was engaging in ministry with Jesus. They saw Jesus as bringing about some revolution they wanted to be a part of. Yeah, they misunderstood his revolutionary thoughts. They didn't realize what he was doing at the time. They wanted a political revolution, and lots of people in our day want a political revolution. But we've been called to bring a kingdom revolution. And Jesus invited his disciples into that kingdom revolution. And that's what we're going to talk about, is how to get in to become not just a consumer, but a contributor to the kingdom of God. Then after that, we're going to move into some weeks talking about where does disciple making happen for ordinary people? What are the ordinary places where disciple making takes place? Are they, do I have to go to a special meeting? Do I have to go to a special room? Do I have to go, I mean, where does this happen? And I think you're going to find, as we talk through that, man, you spend your whole life in these ordinary places and with ordinary other ordinary people, and that's where disciple making really happens. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit as we wrap this whole series up, but I want you to get an idea. This is going to be weeks and months. As we wrap this up, we're going to talk about what does the inner life of a disciple maker look like? What are the thoughts and processes and rhythms? What are the struggles and the challenges? What are the victories? And really, how does it look to be? We're going to kind of take you in the heart of SEAL Team 6 of disciple makers and say, what does their everyday, average, ordinary life look like? So we've got a lot ahead of us. I mean, I'm thinking that we'll be talking about this into 2027, which so excites me. So much here to cover. But I wanted to just say, God birthed this. I believe God birthed this guerrilla discipleship for the purpose of beginning to shift the culture in our thinking so that we would move away from what has been less and less effective. Wouldn't it be great if maybe in a few years, when Barna and others do research, they would say 95% of U.S. congregations have a consistent, maintained, and ongoing reproducible disciple-making culture. 95% instead of 5%. Think about what would happen. Think about the ways that would change our world. Think about all the heartache that people are experiencing that would begin to disappear because they're walking in a love relationship with the God of the universe. So I'm so excited about this, willing to spend the rest of my life talking about and doing all that we're here. So I hope you'll stay for the journey. It's a good time to invite others if you want to just say, hey, he's basically starting a whole thing. You can have them watch this one. And then from here on, we're gonna really lay this out in a systematic way. I'm so looking forward to it, and I'm so excited that you're a part of this. Look forward to the weeks to come. Look forward, as always, to your comments, kbaker@oakdale.church, or you can comment here. We're going to do this together, and it's going to transform us, and God's going to use us to transform our communities, our families, our marriages, and the culture. Excited to do this together. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week.